Start. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Jamie Mason. I'm Assistant Principal Learning and Teaching at Sydenham. I'm joined by Josie Albano, who is our Careers Counsellor. I'm going to start by talking about the consideration of educational disadvantage, and then I'll hand to Josie, who will talk a bit about the SEAS application process. So as you're probably aware, the Victorian government late last month, again is using a consideration of educational disadvantage, which is known as the CED process, to take into account the impacts on student learning this year. This year's Year 12s in particular have had a very disjointed senior secondary school experience, and we would encourage all of our students to think very carefully about utilising this function. The reason they're doing this is because there's an understanding that if you're in a scored VCE or scored VET Unit 3-4 sequence, you have had disruption to your learning as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And your teachers are going to be considering this disadvantage when they're making judgments on school-based assessments. So in the letter that was sent out to you last night, you will find a link to a Google form, and we would like you to use this Google form in order to let us know how you have been disadvantaged over the last year. As I said before, we encourage all of you to use this. It's a pretty simple process and we're not requiring any evidence or documentation. All we're requiring is that you tick a box indicating the level of disruption that you personally have experienced. We may ask you for more information, but it's not required at this point. We're not sending any of this information to VCAR. We're only using the information we're getting from you to pass on to teachers, who will then take into consideration your particular circumstances. So what's this for? It provides you an opportunity to bring any impact experienced as a result of the coronavirus pandemic to the attention of the school. Now, I would say that all of you would have had disrupted learning as a result of school closure, for example. Some of you would have had other impacts as a result of the coronavirus. The level and number of boxes ticked does not equate to a change in study score. So please be very careful, very clear about this. This is not a free pass. It is not about changing scores just for the sake of it. What it will do is it will complement the teachers and school's knowledge of each student's achievement. So you'll see that when you get the Google form, there are a number of categories that we have that you'll need to complete. So if the student's health has been directly affected by the coronavirus, or if existing health vulnerabilities have limited your capacity to attend school, that's an obvious one. But there are a number of others as well. So for example, if there's an immediate family member who has been affected by the virus, I've highlighted the second one there because I think all of us have been impacted as a result of the school closures. There may be some of you who've had increased family responsibilities as a result of the lockdowns. Some of you may have had access issues with remote learning. In other words, there may have been some difficulties getting onto Zoom. There may have been some difficulties accessing technology. Some of you may have had mental health challenges. There may be some family financial hardships that you're experiencing. And as I said before, there may be some technology connection issues. So just to kind of reiterate, multiple and prolonged school closures, we have all experienced that. Some of you have had access issues and some of you have experienced mental health challenges. So there's a link to the Google form and the Google form will ask you to make a judgment on those categories, those types of disadvantages. And there's 3 different levels. Level 1 being the least effective or affected, all the way to level 3. We're not expecting you all to tick boxes for all of those types of disadvantages. There may be some of you who have had all of them, but probably most of us haven't had all of those disadvantages. And you can see when you get into the Google form, it'll ask you for your name, your surname, your first name, and your home group. It's important that you put your home group in the form of W3 or C5. And we need that because it'll allow us to sort the data into home group order. You can see also that there's a continuum. So if, for example, your physical and/or mental health and/or well-being has been directly affected, then you would tick either 1, 2, or 3 for that particular category. If that doesn't relate to your situation, then you don't tick it. So you're only ticking boxes for those categories that you have had and have had an effect on you. It's okay to leave them blank. In fact, I would expect that most of you would leave at least some of those blank. And from there, what happens is that we will get that information, and that needs to be completed by Wednesday, September the 15th. Now, I was told this morning that the letter that you received last night had February the 15th. That is an obvious mistake. You need to complete that by next Wednesday. The reason we need it by then is because we need to collate all that information and then distribute that information to subject teachers so they can have a look and understand how each student has been impacted. The wellbeing team will then review those statements and work with your teachers to take that information and provide context for you as an individual student. Rarely, but sometimes we may also ask for more information. So, for example, if you have been severely impacted by the coronavirus situation and we're not aware of that, we haven't had any information beforehand, we may have to clarify that. There is a function at the bottom of so there is a chat function here that if you've got questions, I would encourage you to ask. But I'm going to hand over now to Josie, who will talk about the SEAS application.
Okay. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about special consideration. And so I'm talking about the SEAS program, and the SEAS program is something that students who are applying for tertiary education, so post Year 12 courses, whether they're TAFE or university, can apply for. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So SEAS stands for the Special Entry Access Scheme, and it's a consideration that most tertiary institutions use in Victoria. You only need to fill out one single SEAS application, and it will cover you for any course that you apply for through your VTAC application. SEAS is a program which allows you to consider circumstances which may have affected you, circumstances which are beyond your control and which have negatively affected your education. And there are 4 categories that we're going to talk about in a minute. And the SEAS application allows the selection officers at the different institutions to grant special consideration to the course entry for all applicants. So this is an example of how SEAS can affect your entry into university. So we can see here that the first student got a 95 ATAR and got it clearly in for their university course. Then we can see that the second student also only got a 90 ATAR, but the bonus subjects and will allow that student to boost their or reclassify their ATAR, and therefore they were also offered a place in this particular course. If we go down to the 5th student, we can see that that student only received an ATAR score of 75. However, the student put it in a C's application, plus also the subject adjustments which that student received, and that student actually received a place in that university course as well, over someone who started out with a lower ATAR, but didn't have all the considerations that student 5 had with the C's application and the subject adjustment. So there are 4 categories when it comes to C's. So the first category is personal information and location, which we advise that all students should apply for this category. The second category talks about disadvantaged financial background. The third category is about a disability or medical condition, and this can also be a mental health condition as well. And the fourth category covers difficult circumstances, and we would definitely say that the effects of remote learning are included in this category as well. So just a little bit more about all the categories. So category 1 covers things like the location, so where our school is located, where the student lives, the age of the student, the gender of the student, whether or not the student attends an underrepresented school, whether or not they're the first in their family to attend university, or if they come from a non-English speaking background. So every student at CRC Sydenham is eligible to apply for this category. And in order to do so, they basically just need to tick in a box in the category 1 section. Category 2 is about disadvantaged financial background. This applies to applicants who have been affected financially, whether or not they receive Centrelink benefits. If they do, if your parents are receive Centrelink benefits, they'll be asked to provide a Centrelink statement to VTAC as evidence. But if you think that you are disadvantaged financially and you don't receive any Centrelink statements, you can also write an impact statement. So the student will be able to submit an impact statement through their VTAC application, and then that will require somebody to provide a supporting statement on the student's behalf as well. And this will be uploaded through the student's individual VTAC account, and all of that information will be received by VTAC, and they will receive that information and make a judgment based on the information that they receive. I just want to note as well that VTAC never speak to the student about whether or not they've been awarded points through the C's program. So basically we just need to put in the application and we don't actually get confirmation from them whether or not the C's application has been granted. However, you'd be able to see by the selection officers and by what course you get accepted into. So if you are putting in a statement for financial disadvantage, you should be able to access your, if you do have a Centrelink statement, you can get a copy of that on your MyGov account, and you can upload that via your VTAC portal as well. Or as I said, you can also write an impact statement and a supporting statement as well. The C's category 3 and 4 talks about a range of different things that could have affected the student throughout their schooling, their education schooling. So these can be things like the effects of COVID learning, things like the student may have been a refugee or an asylum seeker, or a range of other disadvantages that student may have acquired throughout their schooling. So for these categories, the student will need to write a personal impact statement, and this will need to be accompanied by a statement of support. And both of these things would be submitted to VTAC via the student's VTAC portal. When it comes to the effects of remote learning, as part of C's category 4, there is a question that asks the students whether or not their education has been affected by the effects of COVID-19 and remote learning. And we know that everybody who's currently in VCE and studying in year 12 and year 11 has been affected in some way. So we recommend that every student who puts in a VTAC application would also select category 4 and put in an impact statement based on the effects of COVID-19 or any other way that they have been disadvantaged throughout their schooling years. If they are just choosing to put in an application for the effects of COVID or remote learning, they won't need to write an impact statement. Students will be asked to tick the following boxes, and they just need to fill out the grid and just let VTAC know whether or not they had access to reliable internet, whether they had a suitable device, whether or not they had to share a device with other people in the family, whether or not they had a quiet and suitable workspace, and whether or not their online learning was affected as part of COVID-19. Once the students have filled out this table, then this will open up another link in CourseLink, and then the school will be able to go in and rank the student based on whether they have been impacted in a baseline, low, medium, or high category. That's why it's really important that the students complete the Google Doc that we're going to send through for the consideration of educational disadvantage, because this will also serve as a purpose that we can also fill out this grid for the students as well. So we will use that information for this part of their VTAC application as well. And then that will help the students who are wanting to go to university or TAFE next year, and the selection officers at the relevant universities and tertiary providers will be able to get that information as well.
Thanks, Josie. You'll see there's a Q&A function in the webinar. I have one question, but certainly please feel free to type any others. Josie, this is, I think, for you.
Sure.
Is the CEES application only for current year 12s, or do year 11s who complete a year 12 subject also have to complete the form?
Yep, so it's only currently for year 12s. However, in year 12, when the students are applying for their VTAC application, so next year, they'll certainly be able to draw on that information as well. But only students who are currently in year 12 and applying for a course through VTAC will need to fill out the CEES application.
While I'm waiting for any other questions, and if there are any, that'd be great if you want to type them in. If not, that's fine. But just while you're there, there's a few things that was in that letter that you would have received last night. Firstly, tomorrow is a Zoom-free day. So that means that teachers have set work on sector for students to do independently. Teachers will be using that time for planning and marking and planning for the return back to hopefully school next term. Also in that letter, there was information about week 2 of the term break. That was originally scheduled to be trial exams. That's no longer occurring. However, there is an opportunity for teachers to run SACs remotely during that time, and you'll receive a timetable that will be updated. It is an expectation that if a teacher wants to run a SAC during that week, that students will do that. There are a number of subjects who, because of the COVID restrictions, are just fallen a little bit behind on their SAC schedule. So that's what will be happening in the second week of the holidays. There's also next Wednesday at this time, we're getting a third-party provider to come in, Elevate Education, who are going to present to all of our year 12 students around preparing for exams and study skills. That is a free to all students, and I would strongly encourage any student who is undertaking scored assessment this year to attend that webinar. We're also in negotiation with Elevate to run some subject-specific revision programs in week 1, 2, and 3 of next term. Again, that will be free for students, and they will receive copious study guides and notes to go with that. So just keep your eye out for more information around that. we now have some more questions. The first one is that for the Google form as well? I know I'd like all students should fill in the Google form, because even if you're just doing 1 or 2 Year 12 subjects, we will need that information, because each teacher will be adjusting scores based on consideration of educational disadvantage. How specific in depth do you need to be in your impact statement? Is that relating to C's, I think? Josie, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So the impact statement just needs to clarify what the situation was and what the impact was on the students' education. So they don't need to go into great detail regarding, you know, the medical diagnosis or anything like that. It's just about how this particular situation, illness, has affected their educational learning.
Do we have to write an impact statement concerning Area 1 as it comes up as an option to fill out when the category is selected?
No, that's just basically you're just ticking a box, but you do need to click on the C's link. The student needs to click on the C's link in their VTAC portal, and they need to just click, say yes to category 1, and then just go down to the bottom and make sure that they submit their application.
Mitchell, I think I've answered the question about Year 11s completing a 3-4. You should still complete the CED process. I think that we've answered the question about Year 11s doing a 3-4 subject. Right, when are the exams happening? Okay, so the trial exams have been cancelled. We're just not able to complete them remotely, and by the time we get back to school next term face to face, I would imagine that most subject teachers would be running exam type revision with exam type questions over those couple of weeks when students are back. The VCAR end of year exams are still running at this point as published on the VCAR website. So I think that off the top of my head, I think that is Wednesday, the 27th of October, I think is the first written exam. There are performance exams which are still scheduled for early October. So yeah, as I said, at this point, it's important that you check the website. You should have received information around those exams, but there has been no change to the end of year exam timetable at this point. I know that the government is very keen for students to get vaccinated if at all possible. I think that once vaccination rates get to a particular level, the government will feel much more comfortable about getting students back on site. I think I've answered the question about Year 11 students. When does C's form need to be in by, Josie?
The C's form needs to be in by the 9th of October. So all of the supporting documentation and all of the personal impact statements and anything that you're submitting through your C's application will need to be completed by the 9th of October.
How do we apply for specific university access schemes?
So I think you're referring to programs like the SNAP program and things that are specific to the universities. Basically, everything is done through the C's program. So if you put in a C's application, any course that you apply for, so if you apply for a course at RMIT, you automatically qualify for the RMIT SNAP program, and similarly for the Access Melbourne program, VU Guaranteed program. As long as you put in your C's application, the course advisors will see that and you automatically qualify for those programs, unless the program is asking you for something specific that needs to be done via their website. And that's certainly the case in the case of ACU Guarantee program and also Aspire as well. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah. The Elevate webinar, which we're running next week, is open to all students undertaking a Unit 3-4 study, whether it's whether you're year 11 or Year 12. And likewise, next term, we will have after school revision programs run by Elevate, and that's open to any student undertaking 3-4 study. Can we submit our Cs before our courses for uni? I think you've answered that, Josie.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you please clarify again if no communication will be sent if the application was successful, how students would know if they will be eligible for the Cs?
So every student is eligible. So that every student is encouraged to put in an application. We don't get any notification back on the outcome of the Cs application. However, you know, you would be able to see whether or not you were successful based on your entry into your university course.
Just to be clear, are Year 11s completing a Unit 3-4 subject applying for Cs this year? The answer to that is no, isn't it, Josie?
That's correct.
Only current Year 12s who are leaving school at the end of this year. If students are not back at school by the time the GAT is scheduled, will it be cancelled? Look, the government, VCAR and the government are very, very keen to run the GAT. I think GAT is going to be quite important in terms of Year 12 studies this year. We are planning to be for the GAT to run on the 5th of October. I think students should be preparing for that. Of course, if there's a change in circumstances, we'll be communicating that as soon as we know, but I would be saying to all students to be preparing for the GAT to run on the 5th of October. Do we need to complete it this year or next year? I think you're talking about the Cs application. Yeah, you don't need to do it if you're in Year 11, only if you're in Year 12. However, if you are in Year 11, you should do the consideration of educational disadvantage form. Is it likely prerequisite study scores for courses such as English will be lowered through CED or Cs when applying for university programs?
Not the prerequisite study scores. However, the overall ATA score is lowered.
Yeah, and I guess just relating to that, just want to stress that it's really important that you don't rely on the CED or the Cs to get into a particular program. Obviously, it is useful, but it's still going to be around performance in school-based assessment and external assessment. So we really want you to work as hard as you can to maximise your study scores. And then, of course, the CED and the Cs will also have a positive impact. Are impact statements only required for category 2, 3, and 4?
So they're only required for category 3 and 4. But if you're applying that for category 2, which is financial disadvantage, and you don't have a Centrelink, you don't receive any payments for Centrelink, then you will be required to write an impact statement for that category as well.
When are course preferences due?
So the early cutoff for course preferences is the 30th of September. So we encourage all students to get their VTAC application completed before the 30th of September. We would encourage students to finish all of their VTAC applications by the end of term 3, just to know that it's done. And if you have any questions, then you'll be able to ask us, or if you need any support or help with that, you'll be able to get some assistance, until the end of term 3.
I tell this story every year, but from personal experience, my son didn't get his VTAC application in on the due date, and then when he wanted to put it in, it did cost significantly more money. So I would strongly encourage you to get your application in, and then of course once you've done that, you can change those preferences, can't you, Josie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. The last question was, no, there's a few more, sorry. What will happen if we are still in lockdown and the end of year exams are interrupted? Look, I can't give you any more certainty than the fact that right now we're planning to run the VCAR exams as they are currently published. My my thought is that we will be able to run those exams. We'll be certainly working very hard to ensure that we're complying with all of the COVID safe principles. So for example, we will be using more rooms. We'll be having less students in each of the exam rooms. If at some point we went back into lockdown, then I would imagine that VCAR would delay some of those exams. We had exams running much later into the year last year than we normally do. But right now we're planning to run exams as currently published on the VCAR website. Is the COVID vaccine mandatory for students to sit exams? Currently, no. We are under the guidelines. It is not mandatory. Of course, the thing that's going to prevent us, I think, from being able to sit exams is if there is, not the required percentage of the population vaccinated. So I don't want to get into the pros and cons of the vaccine, but I do believe that the restrictions will be eased when a particular portion of the population reaches that vaccine threshold. Is the scores of assessments that will be affected? Is it the scores of assessments that will be affected with the consideration? So the answer to that question is that right now, Unit 3-4 teachers are putting in actual scores. So whatever you have scored in assessment is going to be entered into VAS, which is the VCAR's kind of database. What will happen then is your teacher will receive information about consideration of educational disadvantage, but they'll have an actual score, and then they'll put in what's called an expected score. Now, the expected score is what would the teacher have expected a particular student to have gotten or got if there was no restrictions, if there was no COVID. So let's say a student actually scored, let's say 35. Okay, that's what they actually got. But when we look at the consideration of educational disadvantage, the teacher may say, well, if that hadn't occurred, we would have expected that student to get 38. So they will put in the expected score, and they'll be using consideration of educational disadvantage to help them do that. They won't just be using the student statement though. They'll be using things like previous scores in SACs. They'll be using things like year 11 data. So what was happening with the student in year 11? It's not a perfect system by any stretch, but what we will be strongly encouraging teachers to do is to make sure that if there has been disadvantage, that we reward the student, not reward the student, we take that into consideration. Is the CED only for COVID-19 disadvantages? Yes, it is. Any other disadvantages, I think, would be more about the C's application, wouldn't it, Josie?
Yep, that's correct.
I've been in remote learning for 2 years. How do you use previous SAC? Well, I guess what I would say to that is that in the first part of this year, the majority of the time was face-to-face. So teachers will use their professional judgment, and they'll also use the consideration of educational disadvantage statements to make professional judgments on study scores. Is the scores of assessments that will be affected? Is it the scores of assessments that will be affected with? Yes. So, as I said, we will be looking at what's actually occurred, and then we'll be taking into consideration what would be expected to have occurred without the interruption. Okay. Doesn't seem to be any more Oh, will the students be notified? No, the students will not be notified in regards to the change to scores. They will be submitted to VCAR, and then VCAR will simply publish a study score. So there won't be any distinction between the actual score and the expected score. I can reassure you that students cannot be disadvantaged through this process. The only thing that can happen is that scores can be increased. Is the scores of assessments that will be, yes, I've already answered that one. Can mental health go under Cs4, Josie?
Yes, it can. Mental health can go, that can go under Cs4, or you can also, if you're attending a psychologist, or if you have, if you're under the care of a mental health practitioner or a general practitioner, it can also go under category 3 under mental health or health issues.
There doesn't seem to be any more questions. So I thank you again for your attendance. I hope that we've been able to answer some of your questions. If you have any further questions, then please feel free to contact us at school. Students, as I said, are expected to complete that Google form by next Wednesday. The Google form is relatively straightforward, I think. It's just a matter of making a statement around the effects that each student has gone under as a result of these restrictions. So thank you again for your attendance, and we'll hopefully see you back at school next term.